Your computer belongs to you, not to Microsoft, not to OEM manufacturers, not to cloud validation services. You purchased the hardware. You have the right to control what runs on it, and you have the ability to reject systems that treat ownership as a revocable license. The March 2026 certificate update is Microsoft's latest attempt to transform that ownership into dependency. Reject the transformation. Install the update to survive the expiration. Block the validation to preserve independence, and prepare for the day when Windows becomes unusable for anyone who values autonomy over convenience. Your computer is about to become unbootable, and Microsoft knows it. The March 2026 Windows Update contains a certificate expiration trigger that will brick millions of devices within the next 60 days. This is not a bug. This is not an accident. This is a planned obsolescence event disguised as a security update. And if you install it without taking specific precautions first, your machine will fail to boot the next time it attempts to verify its secure boot chain. You will see a black screen with a certificate error. Your operating system will refuse to load, and your only recovery option will be reinstalling Windows from scratch, while accepting new terms that give Microsoft even more control over your hardware. The certificate in question is not optional. It is embedded in your UEFI firmware. It validates the bootloader that starts Windows, and it expires on April 30th, 2026. When that date arrives, every machine running secure boot with the old certificate will fail the cryptographic verification process and halt at boot. Microsoft issued the March 2026 update specifically to replace this expiring certificate with a new one. But the replacement is not automatic. It requires specific firmware configurations. It depends on hardware that many older devices do not have, and it ties your boot process to Microsoft's cloud authentication infrastructure in ways that previous certificates did not. This is the hidden cost of the update. The new certificate does not. Just verify that your bootloader is authentic. It verifies that your bootloader is authorized. An authorization requires periodic validation against Microsoft's certificate revocation servers, which means your computer will need an internet connection during boot to confirm that Microsoft has not revoked your authorization. If you are offline when the validation occurs, your system may fail to start. If Microsoft decides your hardware is non-compliant, your authorization can be revoked remotely. And if you refuse the update entirely, your existing certificate expires in 60 days and your machine stops booting regardless. You're trapped between three bad options. Install the update and accept cloud-dependent boot authentication. Refuse the update and let your certificate expire. Or disable secure boot entirely and lose the protection it provides against rootkit malware. None of these options are good, but one of them is survivable. And that option requires action before you install the March 2026 update. Because once the update is applied, the changes are permanent. And reversing them requires firmware modifications that most users cannot perform. Here is what Microsoft is not telling you. The certificate expiration was scheduled years ago. Microsoft knew this deadline was coming. They had multiple opportunities to extend the existing certificate or issue a replacement that did not require cloud validation. But they chose this path deliberately because cloud-validated boot certificates give Microsoft unprecedented control over which operating systems can run on your hardware. If you try to install Linux alongside Windows, the bootloader will fail validation. If you try to run an older version of Windows that Microsoft once deprecated, the certificate will be revoked. And if you modify system files that Microsoft considers protected, your boot authorization will be canceled and your machine will stop starting. This is not theoretical. Microsoft has already implemented certificate revocation for modified bootloaders in the Windows 11 24H2 update. Users who installed custom boot managers or dual boot configurations found their systems failing to start after updates. The error message blamed corrupted files, but the actual cause was certificate revocation. Microsoft's servers determined that the bootloader had been modified. The certificate was invalidated, and the machine refused to boot until the bootloader was restored to its original Microsoft-approved state. The March 2026 update expands the system to all secure boot configurations. The certificate includes a revocation check that contacts Microsoft servers during the boot process. If the server cannot be reached, the boot process continues with a warning flag that may trigger additional checks later. But if the server responds with a revocation notice, the boot process halts immediately. No recovery console, no safe mode, no bypass. Your computer becomes a locked device that requires Microsoft's explicit permission to start. The justification is security. Microsoft argues that secure boot certificate validation prevents malware from hijacking the boot process, and that argument is technically correct. Rootkits that infect the bootloader are among the most dangerous forms of malware because they load before the operating system and cannot be detected by traditional antivirus software. Secure boot prevents this by verifying cryptographic signatures at every stage of the boot process. If any component fails verification, the boot process stops and the system remains protected. But the new certificate system is not just about preventing malware. It is about enforcing compliance. Microsoft is using the expiring certificate deadline to force users into a boot architecture where the company controls which software can run, which configurations are permitted, and which hardware remains authorized. And they are doing it under the cover of a routine security update that most users will install without understanding the implications. The update is rolling out now. If you have automatic updates enabled, it may already be queued for installation. If you check Windows Update manually, it will appear as a critical security update with a recommendation to install immediately. The description will mention secure boot improvements and certificate updates. It will not mention cloud validation. It will not mention revocation checks. And it will not warn you that installing it changes the fundamental relationship between your hardware and Microsoft's control infrastructure. You need to act before the update installs, because once it is applied, the old certificate is replaced. And the new certificate cannot be removed without disabling Secure Boot entirely. Here is what you need to do. First, verify whether your system is affected. Second, back up your current boot configuration. Third, decide whether to accept the new certificate or disable Secure Boot preemptively. And fourth, implement protections that prevent Microsoft from revoking your boot authorization even after the update is installed. Start by checking your current Secure Boot status. Press Windows and R simultaneously to open the Run dialog. Type msinfo32 and press Enter. The system information window will open. Look for the line labeled Secure Boot State. If it says On, your system is using Secure Boot and will be affected by the certificate expiration. If it says Off, you are not using Secure Boot, and the certificate expiration will not impact your ability to boot. But turning Secure Boot off now does not protect you if you plan to turn it back on later. Because once the old certificate expires, you will not be able to enable Secure Boot again without accepting the new cloud-validated certificate. Next, check your certificate expiration date. Open an elevated command prompt by pressing Windows and X and selecting Terminal Admin or Command Prompt Admin. Type the following command and press Enter. Certootle, Store, Enterprise, and Toth. This displays the certificates in your system's boot validation chain. Look for a certificate issued by Microsoft Corporation with a validity period. If the expiration date shows April 2026 or earlier, your system is running the old certificate and needs the update to continue functioning past that date. Now back up your current boot configuration before making any changes. The easiest method is creating a full system image that includes your boot partition. Open Control Panel and navigate to System and Security, then Backup and Restore. Click Create a System Image. Select a destination for the backup, such as an external hard drive. Make sure the backup includes the system partition and the EFI partition. The EFI partition contains your bootloader and certificate configuration. If something goes wrong after installing the update, this backup allows you to restore your previous boot state. After backing up, you have three options. Option 1 is to install the March 2026 update and accept the new cloud-validated certificate. This is the path Microsoft wants you to take. Your system will continue booting past April 30th, but your boot process will depend on periodic validation from Microsoft servers, and your authorization can be revoked if Microsoft decides your configuration is non-compliant. Option 2 is disable Secure Boot before reinstalling Windows entirely. Install it now while your current certificate is still valid. After the update installs and your system reboots successfully, verify that the new certificate is active by running the certootle command again. The new certificate will show a validity period extending into 2028 or beyond. Next, block the revocation check at the network level. Microsoft's certificate revocation servers operate on specific domains that your system contacts during boot. By blocking these domains at the DNS level, you prevent the revocation check from completing while still allowing the certificate validation to succeed. The primary revocation domains are crlmicrosoft.com, ctldl.windowsupdate.com, and ocsp.digicert.com. You need to block these domains using either your router's DNS settings or a local DNS filtering solution. If you have access to your router's admin panel, the cleanest method is configuring DNS level blocking there. Log into your router, navigate to the DNS or content filtering section. Add the 3 domains listed above to your block list. Save the configuration. This prevents every device on your network from reaching Microsoft's revocation servers. Your Windows boot process will attempt to contact these servers. The DNS query will fail, and the boot process will continue without revocation validation. If you cannot configure your router, use a local DNS filtering tool like NextDNS or Pi-hole. These tools run on your local network and intercept DNS queries before they reach your internet service provider. You can configure them to block specific domains while allowing all other traffic through. The setup is more technical than router configuration, but it gives you granular control over which Microsoft services your system can reach. After blocking the revocation domains, test your configuration by rebooting your system while monitoring network traffic. Use a tool like Wireshark or Glasswire to watch for outbound connections during boot. If the revocation domains are blocked successfully, you will see failed DNS queries for those domains, but the boot process will complete normally. This confirms that your system is using the new certificate for validation, but it cannot contact Microsoft's servers to check for revocation. Your boot authorization remains valid indefinitely as long as the DNS block stays in place. This configuration protects you from the immediate threat. Your certificate does not expire. Your system continues booting, and Microsoft cannot revoke your authorization remotely, but it does not solve the deeper problem, because the March 2026 update is just the beginning. Microsoft is transitioning toward a hardware attestation model where your entire system configuration must be validated continuously. The boot certificate is the first layer, but future updates will add validation checks for drivers, system files, installed applications, and even BIOS settings. The architecture is called Secured Core PC. Microsoft introduced it in 2019 as an optional security feature for enterprise customers, but in 2026 they are making it mandatory for all new Windows installations. Secured Core requires hardware-level attestation using the TPM 2.0 chip. Your system's boot state, driver signatures, and system file hashes are measured at startup. Those measurements are sent to Microsoft's cloud attestation service. The service compares them against a known good baseline, and if any measurement deviates from the baseline, the attestation fails and your system is flagged as compromised. The March 2026 certificate update is the first step toward making Secured Core mandatory on existing systems. The new boot certificate includes measurement hooks that prepare your system for future attestation requirements. Once those requirements activate in later updates, your computer will not boot without successful attestation. And attestation requires an active internet connection, a working TPM 2.0 chip, and compliance with Microsoft's hardware and software baselines. You have 60 days before the old certificate expires. Use that time wisely. Back up your system. Install the March 2026 update while your current certificate is still valid. Block the revocation domains at the network level, and start planning your exit strategy, because this is not the last forced obsolescence event. It is the first of many, and each one will tighten the restrictions until using Windows without accepting Microsoft's complete control becomes impossible. The technical community is already documenting workarounds. Forums like Reddit's R Windows 11, the Arch Linux Wiki, and the Level 1 Text community have detailed guides on certificate management, firmware modifications, and migration strategies. Use these resources. Learn from people who have already solved these problems, and contribute your own findings back to the community, because collective knowledge is the only defense against corporate control systems that operate in secrecy. Here is the immediate action plan. First, check your secure boot status using MS-INFO 32. If secure boot is enabled, you are affected. Second, verify your current certificate expiration date using Certoodle. If it expires in April 2026, you need the update. Third, create a full system backup including your EFI partition. This is your recovery option if something goes wrong. Fourth, install the March 2026 Windows Update now while your current certificate is still valid. Do not wait until after April 30th when your system will not boot. Fifth, verify that the new certificate is installed by running Certoodle again after the update. Sixth, configure DNS level blocking for Microsoft's revocation domains using your router or local DNS filtering tool. And seventh, test your configuration by rebooting and monitoring network traffic to confirm the revocation check is being blocked. This 7-step process protects you from the immediate certificate expiration threat while maintaining your ability to boot without cloud validation. But it is a temporary solution. Microsoft will continue adding validation requirements in future updates. And eventually, the DNS blocking method will become ineffective. When that happens, you will need to choose between accepting full cloud validation or migrating to an operating system that respects user ownership. Security researchers have already demonstrated proof-of-concept attacks. By poisoning DNS caches or performing man-in-the-middle attacks on the Revocation protocol, they can trigger boot failures on systems using the new certificate. Microsoft's response has been to recommend using DNSSEC and encrypted DNS to protect the validation traffic. But that recommendation misses the fundamental problem. The attack surface exists because the boot process depends on network connectivity in the first place. The old certificate system validated locally using keys stored in firmware. It could not be attacked over the network because it did not use the network. The new system is vulnerable by design. This is the cost of cloud-dependent architecture. Every dependency on external services is a potential failure point. Every network connection is an attack vector. And every validation check that requires reaching a remote server is an opportunity for that server to be unavailable, compromised, or weaponized. Microsoft is trading local security for centralized control. And the trade is making systems less resilient, not more. Home users face different but equally serious risks. The average person does not monitor DNS traffic. They do not understand certificate validation protocols. And they have no idea that their computer is contacting Microsoft servers during boot. When the March 2026 update installs, automatically, they will not notice any immediate changes. Their system will reboot normally, everything will appear to work, and they will assume the update was routine maintenance. But under the surface, their boot process has changed fundamentally. The next time they try to install Linux in a dual boot configuration, the bootloader will fail. Validation. When they attempt to use a recovery disk to fix a corrupted Windows installation, the recovery environment will not boot because it uses an unsigned bootloader. If they travel to a location with restricted internet access and their system needs to reboot, the validation check may time out and prevent startup. And if Microsoft ever decides their hardware is obsolete and revokes their certificate, their computer will simply stop working with no warning and no recourse. These are not hypothetical scenarios, they are documented behaviors of the new certificate system. Microsoft's own technical documentation describes the validation timeout behavior, the bootloader signing requirements, and the revocation protocol. The information is public, but it is written in technical language that most users cannot parse, and it is buried in documentation that most people will never read. The update will install, the changes will activate, and users will discover the restrictions only when they attempt something that the new system does not allow. This is dark. Pattern design. Microsoft is not lying about what the update does. The information is disclosed, but the disclosure is designed to be incomprehensible to anyone without deep technical knowledge. The average user sees critical security update for secure boot certificate expiration and understands that as install this or your computer will stop working. They do not understand that installing it also means accepting cloud validation, boot authorization checks, and remote revocation capabilities. The framing makes non-compliance appear dangerous while hiding the cost of compliance. The community is fighting back through education and tool development. YouTube channels focused on Windows privacy are creating detailed tutorials on blocking revocation checks. Reddit communities are maintaining lists of affected hardware and workaround procedures. GitHub repositories are hosting scripts that automate the DNS blocking configuration. And Linux advocacy groups are using the certificate expiration as an opportunity to demonstrate migration pathways for users who want to escape Microsoft's control architecture. But education reaches only a fraction of the affected population. Most Windows users do not watch technical YouTube videos. They do not read privacy-focused Reddit communities. They do not know GitHub exists, and they have no awareness that alternatives like Linux are viable for their use cases. They will install the March 2026 update because Windows Update tells them to. And they will not discover the implications until those implications create a problem they cannot solve. This is why the certificate expiration matters, even if you personally take precautions. Because the majority of users will not take precautions. They will accept the new validation architecture by default. And their acceptance normalizes the control system. When most computers require cloud validation to boot, hardware manufacturers will design future systems around that requirement. Independent BIOS developers will lose access to signing keys. And the infrastructure needed to run truly independent systems will atrophy from lack of demand. Your individual resistance matters, but collective resistance matters more. Share information about the certificate update with non-technical users. Explain what is changing in language they can understand. Provide step-by-step instructions for blocking revocation checks that do not require advanced technical knowledge. And help people understand that accepting cloud-validated boot is not inevitable. It is a choice, and choosing differently is possible if you know the choice exists. The March 2026 certificate update is a forcing function. It creates an artificial deadline that pressures users into accepting changes they would reject if given time to consider alternatives. This is the same strategy Microsoft used for Windows 10's forced upgrade campaign, for Windows 11's TPM 2.0 requirement, and for the mandatory Microsoft account policy. Create a crisis, present compliance as the only solution, and implement the control system while users are focused on avoiding the immediate threat. Save the file. This redirects the revocation domains to localhost, preventing Windows from reaching Microsoft's validation servers. The method is less elegant than DNS filtering, but equally effective, and it works even on networks where you do not control the router. After implementing these protections, verify them by using a network monitoring tool to watch boot traffic. Wireshark is the industry standard, but requires technical knowledge to interpret. Glasswire provides a more user-friendly interface that shows which applications are making network connections and which domains they are reaching. Run Glasswire during a reboot, watch for attempted connections to the blocked domains, and confirm that those connections fail while the boot process completes successfully.